Cups and challenges are about to start for the 2026 season, and today we'll go over everything from tournament structure and what to expect to how to prepare to win one of these tournaments. Cups and challenges are the two types of local tournaments that can earn championship points, and they both have a best finish limit of 4. So that just means only the 4 best cup finishes and 4 best challenge finishes count towards our total championship point total for the year. For someone who only plays in local tournaments, championship points don't really matter all that much outside of getting the 200 points for the Ace Trainer Rewards program, and that is very achievable by only going to cups and challenges. The other two reasons to try to earn championship points are to compete for a Worlds invite or to try and compete for a stipend. Both of these require going to several major events and maybe even a couple international championships. And based on the number of points needed to qualify for Worlds last year and some of the changes they made for this year, as of right now it's looking like around 800 points is what is going to be required to qualify for Worlds, but that's really besides the point. Today we're talking about cups and challenges. So there are a few differences between these two types of tournaments. First of all, cups award more championship points and have a top cut to decide the winner. Each store can only have 1 cup per quarter, so each store has 4 cups per year, and all these things combined usually make them a bit more competitive. Challenges can be held by each store once per month, and they have no top cut, so they only have Swiss rounds. They're usually 3, 4, or 5 rounds, and the person with the highest number of match points after the rounds is the winner. Match points work like this: winning a round is 3 points, a loss is 0, and a tie is 1 point. And if 2 different players have the same number of match points at the end of the tournament, their standing is then decided by resistance, and resistance is just your opponent's win percentage throughout the tournament. So in theory, the person that played the better opponents throughout the tournament has better resistance, and therefore they get a better placement. Challenges are usually a bit less competitive and cheaper than cups, and I think that winning a challenge is a great goal for a new player, and having goals in a game like Pokemon is pretty important. Cups are my favorite type of tournament to go to because they're local, they have a top cut, and the winner gets a cool playmat. And the pricing is also a bit better than challenges because they tend to cost a little bit more. Cups usually have 4, 5, or 6 Swiss rounds, followed by either a top 4 or a top 8. 21 or more masters gets a top 8, and less than that is just top 4. I think that the average cup has 5 Swiss rounds followed by a top 8, and they should usually announce how many Swiss rounds there are before the tournament starts, but in a 5-round tournament, the first goal is going to be to start out with a 3-0 record, and whenever it's 5 rounds into top 8, being 3-0 almost always means that we can ID twice and make top cut. Of course, this isn't true 100% of the time, and most of the time that's not true is when there's only a top 4 cut, but I don't think I've ever seen someone miss top 8 at 302, and I don't know if it's even possible. But now that we're 3-0, we can ID twice, and ID just means intentional draw, which is just an agreement between 2 players to not play the game and draw, and it's usually done so that both players can make it into top cut. And of course, if there are 6 Swiss rounds, the 3-0 goal is going to change to 4-0 and then double ID. Another thing about IDing is we're only allowed to ask our opponent 1 time if they want to ID, and if they say no, we just have to play it out. We can't keep, pushing the matter. Can lead to a disqualification from the tournament, so just asking once is fine. So while going 3-0-2 into top cut is usually the goal because it's just the easiest way to get there, that is often not the case, and it's pretty common to end up losing a round. So the next goal for that is going to be to try to get to 3-1 in that intentional draw, because 3-1-1 usually gets top 8 at most cups. It can get a little weird when there's certain number of players, like when there's 5 rounds but just barely not enough players to meet the 6-round threshold. So asking to see standings is always completely fine as well, and the store will print out a piece of paper that has everyone's standings with everyone's resistance on it, which is opponent's win percentage. Then there's a column next to that is opponent's win percentage, which is used as a tiebreaker for just opponent's win percentage. If your resistance is really high, like higher than everyone else's, almost always going to be safe to ID into top cut. But if it's on the lower end, that is when we're going to have to play it out. It is pretty common that someone with a high resistance might get paired against someone with a low resistance. So one person might want to ID, but the other person has to play it out. And then just both players have to play it out and see who gets into cut. But now we're in Top Cut. How does that work? Top Cut is a single elimination bracket of either the top 8 or the top 4 players at the tournament. And it's going to always be best of 3. So best of 3 just means instead of only playing one game, either player will have to win 2 games to win the match. And best of 3 is a lot different than best of 1. It brings kind of like a whole new skill set into it that really has nothing to do with playing the game, but more kind of being aware of time and trying to manage time properly. I can't remember if stores are required to do 60 minutes for Top Cut for cups now, or if it's still kind of their choice from 50 and above. But if it is just 50 minutes and we're losing one of the games, we're basically going to have to scoop up the game and just concede and try to win the next game, especially if it's the first game. Now, it hasn't always been like this, but now we are allowed to know how much time is left in the round, so it's always okay to ask the judge or the TO or whatever. And we're definitely going to want to be aware of that, especially if we won the first game, because if we won the first game and it was like a 10-minute game, we know there's still plenty of time left. So if we're pretty sure that we're going to lose the second game, we just have to scoop it up and go to game 3. But if we won game 1 and it was like a 40-minute game and we're pretty sure that we're going to lose game 3, there really is no reason to scoop the game, because chances are that game's not going to finish and the third game is definitely not going to finish. It is important that we're not playing slower than normal or anything like that. It is a requirement to keep the same pace of play throughout a best of 3. And I do just think it is very disrespectful to our opponents if we win the first game and slow our pace of play down a lot and start doing extra actions for no reason, like shuffling between every deck search and stuff like that. That is just rude, and you know, it's just a Pokemon tournament. It's not that deep. We don't have to do all these extra things to win, but I would recommend to, you know, consider time when trying to decide whether to scoop or not. And another point about best of 3 is to actually finish a whole best of 3, someone is going to have to scoop a game somewhere. So how do we prepare for one of these tournaments? Well, the first and most obvious that everyone says is just play the game more, get really good at playing one deck, and then bring that deck to everything. And at this exact point in the game, that really is the best advice. There aren't really decks that have super polarizing matchups. Generally, every deck can beat any other deck, especially if we're really familiar with it. So just picking a deck and grinding it is a completely acceptable thing to do. And don't feel like if, you know, we pick one deck that we're stuck with that deck no matter what. Try to find a deck that is fun to play and is at least a good deck. And that is the second thing. Play a top tier deck. Just going to limitlesstcg.com and going to the most recent tournament and grabbing one of the top 8 deck lists is always a completely fine thing to do, and is probably recommended, especially for newer players. Trying to win even cups and challenges with rogue decks can be pretty tricky, and it does just make it a lot harder. That is why rogue decks aren't meta decks, because it's harder to win with them. They're just not as powerful, so they do require better play. That being said though, that doesn't always mean that they're terrible to bring, especially to something like a cup or a challenge, because cups or challenges usually have a much more centralized meta because there's less people. So we're not preparing for something like a regional where we could literally play against anything. We could play against 9 different decks on day 1. At a cup or a challenge, especially after going to that local area a bunch of times, it is pretty likely that we're going to be able to have a decent idea of what everyone else is going to bring. And if it is a super centralized meta of only 1 or 2 decks, maybe playing a rogue deck that just beats those 2 decks is completely fine. Of course, that can always backfire. People can always switch decks and stuff like that, but that is what would be called metagaming. It's not as important of a thing anymore, but it's just guessing what everyone else is going to play and either playing a deck that beats it or putting like tech cards in our own deck to try to beat it. It used to be a very common thing for even regionals and stuff, but right now, like, even the best players have shown everyone that just grinding the same deck is really valuable at this point. But that doesn't mean that we can't cater our deck list to be a little bit better at locals. Like, if we know that a lot of our locals are going to play decks that are going to want to attack with Budew a couple of times, and we're playing another evolution deck, we can add something like Arven and TM Evo or a couple of Brocks or Jacks to the deck just to have a bit better of a time into item lock. And another thing that I kind of like to do is if I'm playing a deck that normally has tech cards for a certain matchup in it, but I don't expect that matchup to be popular at all at my locals, I'll just take that tech card out of the deck and add an extra consistency card, especially in best of one. Just having better odds to just get into the game and actually be able to play the game is pretty beneficial. So here's an example of how I kind of changed my Guardy list to the way that I like it, and also to be a little bit better into my locals meta. The two types of decks that I was expecting at the time was Raging Bull and Dragapult, and maybe some other random aggressive decks. So I wanted to make sure that I had a third rare candy in the deck, and since I expected a lot of Dragapult and best of one Swiss, I added in a Mew EX because it's really good against Dragapult and it just adds some extra consistency. And since I was expecting Dragapult, I'm also expecting Budew. So a Brock Scouting, always a good card to have against Budew, but it is also just another consistency card for other matchups. And then the one other big change that I wanted to make to the deck was adding a Boss's Orders. I know people weren't playing it at all in the deck at this time, but Boss is just a really good card in any matchup, but especially at a local tournament, if a card were to win me just one of the rounds, 1 out of 5 rounds is 20%, so it helped me in 20% of the games, which is a pretty big percentage and a lot more impactful than at something like a regional. Whereas at a regional, we're playing 9 or 14 or whatever rounds, so there's more time for everything to kind of balance itself out. But in a smaller tournament, these cards are going to be a little bit more impactful. Hopefully that makes sense. It makes sense in my head. While I do think it is beneficial to pick a deck and stick to it, these are just local events. There's plenty of them throughout the year. So these are going to be the best types of tournaments, other than maybe just online tournaments, but the best types of tournaments to kind of experiment and try out new decks. Whereas a regional, if we play a deck that we never played before and bomb out of the tournament, we potentially wasted $1,000 traveling and entry to the tournament and everything. But at a local, it's like 15, 20 bucks and the cost of gas or whatever. So there's really not much of a downside to playing a deck that we might not be as good at. And at a certain point, it becomes a lot easier to pick up a new deck and play it as well as needed, especially as well as is needed to win a local tournament. And one of the ways to learn to just pick up new decks and learn how to play them pretty quickly is by actually doing it. So there's no harm in doing this every once in a while, but I think that this really comes down to being honest with ourselves as a player, and if we actually feel that we're able to pick up a new deck we never played before and play it well enough to win a locals. And I think probably the best way to prepare for local tournaments is with online limitless tournaments. I would definitely recommend this. I was playing a fair amount of limitless tournaments at one point, and it made every single cup that I went to feel a lot easier. And I think I ended up winning most of the cups that I went to in this time period. So I would definitely do that. Try to pick cups that have 100 or more players in it. The small ones are going to be a little closer to a local tournament, but I think that playing in the bigger ones that are closer to a regional are a lot more beneficial to help for locals, because in these tournaments we have to go like 6-2-1 or whatever to make day 2, and then when we go to our next local, all we have to do is go 3-0 and then double ID. It seems a lot more achievable and a lot easier. And there is a lot of like a mental thing to Pokemon of if winning a cup like seems impossible, it's almost going to become impossible, because there's like that barrier in our head that is just going to make it a lot harder to do. And probably the last thing is just be confident. Any player is beatable. There is no one that can't be beat in Pokemon. In theory, the worst player in the world could beat the best player in the world. We're playing a card game. There's RNG. Things happen, but if you're making any sort of effort in practicing, especially if you're this far in this random video of me rambling, clearly trying to get better, so almost certainly not the worst player in the world. So you're more than capable of beating any player at locals or regional or whatever. Have that confidence. If we go into a match and just go, oh no, I'm playing against this person, there's no way I'm gonna win, that just makes it a lot harder, and it's really just not a great mindset to have. I know I've definitely done that to myself before, where I've lost games that I should have won because the player that I'm playing against is a really good player, just kind of got nervous and played worse because of it. Also, as always, I just want to give a huge shout out to the channel members. Thank you so much. I really do greatly appreciate it. So hopefully y'all like the video. Let me know what your goals for this season are down in the comments below. Have you won your first cover challenge yet? And if there's anything else you want me to cover, put it in the comments below. So like or dislike, comment, and subscribe. Take care and have a good one.